Is liberty dying where you live? Escape to Keene at freekeene.com.
All right, so we're going to keep things rolling here so we can make sure everybody gets out to lunch on time today. It's just been great so far. Really appreciate everybody coming out for the morning sessions here on Saturday. Beautiful day outside. Sorry to keep you indoors, but we'll be getting out of the hotel here in about 2 hours, or actually about an hour and a half at this point. So we've got the Secession panel, and secession, kind of a dirty word. You know, a lot of people, secession. Well, it's something that's going to be more talked about, I think, in the future, especially with the advent of two groups in particular. There's the Foundation for New Hampshire Independence. There's also the New Hampshire Liberty Party. Now, these are two organizations that coincidentally were founded right around the same time. It's actually been, I believe, just over a year that both organizations have been around. We have representatives from both of those groups here on the secession panel. Secession is an idea that's time has come again. It needs to happen, in my opinion, in a peaceful manner this time around, and I think that New Hampshire is going to be the right place, hopefully, that will make it happen sooner, but I don't care. Whoever it is that secedes first, I think it's great, because whoever goes first is going to be that which encourages the next one, and then so on and so forth. It may end up being like dominoes falling after a certain point. So I think that's one of the most critical issues of our time, is to get the federal government out of our lives. Yeah, the state government isn't great, but at least we can, drive there in an hour. At least you can call the state reps at their home. The New Hampshire political scene is a whole lot more accessible than the federal government, so there's a lot more potential for change. And as we've seen, as you learned on the legislative panel yesterday, there's a lot of ways for people to make a difference here in New Hampshire, and we can't do anything about the federal government, so leaving it would be the best idea, in my opinion. But we'll hear what these panelists have to say about it, because they are definitely interested in these ideas. Darryl Perry is the host of the panel. I will let him introduce the remaining the folks on the panel, and thanks again for being here at Keenevention. Enjoy.
Thank you, Ian, for the wonderful introduction. My name is Darryl W. Perry. I am hosting this panel. I, along with Ian and Conan, am one of the three co-chairs of the New Hampshire Liberty Party, was also one of the three co-founders of the New Hampshire Liberty Party. And, I've been an advocate for secession for a really long time. And joining me on the panel is Conan Salada and Chandler. What is your last name again, Chandler?
Chandler Gabel. Thanks very much.
Chandler Gabel. I will let each of you introduce yourself. Conan?
My name is Conan Salada. I, as Darryl mentioned, am also a member of the New Hampshire Liberty Party. Our main platform is the secession of New Hampshire from the United States, the organization known as the United States. And on top of that, any other aggressive organizations, be they city, state, county, whatever, but that's at the top of our list. And as soon as we achieve that, that party will, cease to exist. We'll secede from the party as well. So it's not, Republican, Democrat kind of thing, but it does provide those who disagree with those two parties, the two-party system that we live in. It does provide candidates. Political candidates an opportunity, another option, if they don't wish to align with the two options that are available to us.
Chandler?
Hi, I'm Chandler Gabel, and I am the Director of Communications at the Foundation for New Hampshire Independence. We're an educational and community building organization, and we want to be your friendly neighborhood secessionists. We firmly believe that the best way to mainstream the idea of secession is to be good neighbors and to show that the people who favor independence are people just like you. We have the same hopes, the same dreams, the same struggles as those of us who haven't come around to the idea of New Hampshire independence yet. And so we're toward that end, we focus on community building efforts and getting the word out about independence.
Okay, so you guys already pretty much answered the first question of in what ways do you advocate for secession. And People might be wondering why I have my computer up here. I was initially going to try streaming the audio, but I'm having trouble with the streaming software. But I did put something out on Twitter asking for people to tweet their questions to me. So that way, if anybody tweets a question, I will be able to see that question. And if you're in the audience and you're too shy to come stand at the microphone and you have your smartphone, you can tweet a question at Darryl W. Perry, #Secession. So hopefully by the end of the day today, Secession will be trending on Twitter. So I want to sort of talk about some of the pros and cons of secession, because that's one of the things that happens when you start talking to people that aren't secessionists of, well, we tried that once. Well, no, we didn't try anything because I wasn't alive. And they also, people seem to forget that the United States of America was founded on secession. The 13 colonies that became the United States of America seceded from Great Britain. And people forget that. So let's start off with
or they're never taught it in government school.
They're taught that the colonies declared independence. They're not taught that declaring independence is the same thing as secession. So let's talk about the benefits of secession before we go into the objections and how you counter the objections. So either one of you want to jump in on what you see as the main benefits of secession, specifically for New Hampshire, but it could be applied to any geographic area.
I think that there are incredible benefits that a lot of people believe we would lose. A lot of things that we would benefit, people believe we are already receiving from the federal government. But at the end of the day, we're shipping off, all this loot to Washington, and the first thing they do with it, or at least half of it, and they send it overseas to bomb weddings. And then there's no telling what other federal organizations they end up funding. And then at the end of the day, the states get together and essentially beg for some scraps off the big table. And when we do get those scraps back, what do we get? We get Bearcats, or we get silly stimulus funds, or bridges to nowhere. There's if you drive down 12, you'll see the $2.3 million crosswalk that was given to us, and the bureaucrats and the legislators who bring this pork back to us pat themselves on the back, thinking they did a terrific job at the end of the day. But it really, you've got to ask yourself, the scraps that we get back, is it really even, worth it all? Why don't we just keep that money here? First of all, keep it in the state. And then if you argue for seceding from the state as well, keep it here in a community where the people who have earned that money can put it right back into the community.
So to sort of break it down into a soundbite, taxation is a main benefit for secession because New Hampshire is what they call a donor state.
That's right. We're actually one of the larger donor states in the country, and what that means is that we send far more money to Washington than we get back. So we send them our hard-earned money. They send us back a portion of it in return for implementing policies that are repugnant to New Hampshire's most dearly held values. We think we would be a lot better off without that happening.
True.
So other than taxation, what is a primary benefit for New Hampshire to secede?
Well, I think the biggest one is, it's like Frederick Bastiat, what is seen and not seen. We don't see what could be happening in New Hampshire if the federal government wasn't getting in the way. They involve themselves in every phase of our lives. They regulate everything from what kind of food we eat to how we spend our money to how we educate our children. It's not right, and New Hampshire can do better than that. And, I think if you see the federal government getting out of the way, what you would see is an explosion of creativity in New Hampshire as if free people work on solving the problems that the federal government has inserted itself into over the last 250 years.
So are you saying that a free or independent New Hampshire would have flying cars before the end of the year?
I'm hoping for that, Darryl. Yeah, I think that we could. I do think that we could, jump far ahead in terms of technology and just general well-being if we got these people out of our lives and stopped them from impoverishing us.
Okay, so now let's talk about some of the objections. And while mentioning objections, if anybody can think of one that we don't think of, feel free to come up to the microphone and just shout out, "What about the roads?" But we've already determined what would happen to the roads. We're going to have flying cars. Do you have something to say real quick?
Quick question, just devil's advocate objection.
Certainly.
So, are you familiar with the Samson option in the context of Middle East politics? I can quickly explain that.
By Samson, you're referring to the biblical figure who pushed the temple walls down?
Right. So for the last few decades, I think since the early 60s to late 60s, Israel has been an unacknowledged nuclear state. And conventional wisdom has been such that Israel survives despite their numerical inferiority because of the threat, or the implied threat, that it's just known that if there was multi-million man army converging from all sides, that their capitals would be would just turn to glass. So the question here is, could a minarchist New Hampshire, or perhaps even an Ancapistan New Hampshire with private defense agencies, could it survive without something analogous to the Samson option against the extremely cruel, oppressive, just incomprehensibly evil Leviathan that we're living under? Could something, perhaps the most evil entity in the world at the moment, could that be held off of something that without some sort of nuclear stalemate?
The way I understand the question, and correct me if I'm wrong, could New Hampshire remain independent knowing that the United States military still exists?
We could still be much weaker, but as long as we had, say...
Well, you said the most evil entity in existence, and I'm interpreting that to mean the U.S. military, because the U.S. military kills more people than any other agency alive.
I mean, a handful of nuclear weapons, or whatever, or something even equivalent to that as like a deterrent.
Well, if I could speak to that, I mean, this is one of the questions that we get all the time. Won't the United States roll tanks into Manchester if we ever declare our independence? And our claim is that they won't. I mean, I think that the world has changed drastically since the last time that independence from the United States was tried. Back in the 19th century, the trend was larger countries, more centralization. Today, it's exactly the opposite. Back in 1900, there were I think something like 62 independent countries in the world. Now there are almost 200. The trend belongs to local control. I mean, if you look at the Soviet...
193 members of the United Nations and 268 quote-unquote sovereign territories or sovereign nations.
That's
so
right, Darryl.
Puerto Rico is considered by the CIA to be a sovereign nation, even though it's a U.S. territory.
Sure. So there's some wiggle room there, certainly. But,
right.
But the trend is still going in the direction, I think, of smaller nations, local control, and support for independence among the general public. I think if New Hampshire were to declare independence, what you would see is a case where the government in Washington might not like what they're doing, but they have to accept it because their own people will demand nothing less. If you look back at the Soviet Union when they broke up, that was certainly one of the most evil organizations in the world. A brutal communist dictatorship murdered millions of its citizens, and there was almost no bloodshed. The republics went their own way, and today they're advanced market economies in their own right. We think the same thing can happen here.
So would you say the restraining factor would be like a sense of revulsion amongst the people in the other 49 states? There would be some sort of that would be what would be restraining the federal government from messing with us.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, any government can get away with, acting against the will of its people to a certain extent, but something like the United States government, which relies for its legitimacy on the idea that this is a democracy and we are the government and all that sort of thing, I just don't think people are going to have the stomach for, rolling tanks into a former U.S. state that decided to peacefully go its own way.
So let me sort of turn this into a slightly different question. There is the group Spirit of Arcadia that is advocating regional secession for the areas currently known as Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. Do you think that that is a possibility? Instead of just New Hampshire seceding on its own, maybe forming some sort of confederation with the two neighboring states that aren't Massachusetts?
One of the bigger objections, and this will lead into that, is the size of New Hampshire being only 1.3 million. Very independent peoples, but there's such a small portion.
There are a bunch of countries that have less than 1.3 million people.
But when you consider that we're a part of a 300 million population country, and the people, at this time, at this second, it is frowned upon, the idea of leaving the Union. They probably would not take kindly to it, but by the time this actually happens, I think that it will be a much more popular idea. And states will be able to slip off of the radar very easily. I hope that I wish New Hampshire would be the first to jump on this wagon, but I kind of would much rather someone like Texas do it first. And if the federal government has any problem with them, they send the troops there first. They have 26 million versus our 1.3. We kind of slip off of in the dark of night. And so, yeah, if we had two more states to go along with us, that would increase our numbers, our power in numbers. And so, yeah, I think that would be probably a more beneficial move.
Chandler?
I think it certainly could be beneficial. I think it depends. If I can steal a line from Mel Gibson in the Patriot, I'd be very reluctant to trade one tyrant 1,000 miles away for 1,000 tyrants 1 mile away. I think if we are going to go into some sort of cooperative effort with other states, we'd have to make sure that New Hampshire's unique culture and unique values can be protected, not only from the federal government that we're leaving, but also from the new confederation that we're joining.
So what are some of the other objections? You sort of touched on one about the rolling in of tanks and whatnot. And from a historical perspective, every time that a secession has been attempted, not just in the United States, but anywhere in the world, there has been military force used to try to quell the rebellion as it is seen from the occupying force. So why do you think that is something that would not happen now?
I think that it might happen now.
Well, Chandler was saying that he doesn't. So the question is aimed directly at Chandler.
Sure. Well, I think that the United States is a special case because we see ourselves as sort of a nation founded on an ideal, and the ideal is freedom and democracy. And I think that certainly the government does not live up to that ideal, but there are a lot of people in the country that still do, and that still believe themselves to be, upholding that ideal. They believe that America upholds that ideal. That's the source of the pride they take in their nation.
But it seems as though after events such as Hurricane Katrina back in 2005, when the city of New Orleans was put under martial law,
right,
and military was being used to go door to door to confiscate people's weapons for their own safety, of course, people outside of New Orleans didn't really bat an eye about it. They said, well, that's just what happens. Mm-hmm. And in Boston this past April, when there were, the Bearcats, the Nashua Bearcat was sent down into Watertown, Mass. To go door to door to, protect people, and people put up with it. So I'm trying to figure out why you think that people won't put up with, our wonderful liar and drone bomber in chief killing people for trying to leave the country, because after all, if they're trying to leave, they must be terrorists.
Well, I think there are a couple of aspects to it. I think, first of all, if we were to declare our independence tomorrow, the scenario that you're describing is much more likely. I think in order to get there from here, we have to get to a point where secession is mainstreamed within New Hampshire, and as a result, is not something that can be marginalized as easily as it can be marginalized right now.
And something else that would have to change in New Hampshire for New Hampshire to actually be able to secede is the oath of office taken by every elected official in the state of New Hampshire. They must not only swear to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States, they must also pledge their allegiance to the United States. So how could someone who swears allegiance to the United States then, as governor or a state rep or a state senator, vote on or sign a bill to secede from what they swore allegiance to?
I think that needs to be part of the process. I think we need to, in mainstreaming the idea, gradually get to the point where the idea of swearing allegiance to the United States as part of the New Hampshire oath of office is seen as inappropriate by enough people that it can be changed. And after it can be changed, then there won't be as much push. There won't be a perceived conflict there between the oath that they're taking and the actions that they're taking in declaring independence.
So how long do you think it will take before secession can actually be something that is looked at as a serious option in New Hampshire?
Well, we're playing a long game here as the foundation. It's certainly not going to be this year or next year, and probably not even 5 years from now. But I would be very happy if 10 years down the road we were able to get to the point where secession is talked about. It seemed to be an appropriate option, even if it's not the only option, and it's something very much in keeping with the values and history of New Hampshire. It's going to be gradual and it's going to be slow, but we're willing to stay in the game for as long as it takes.
Dealing just here in the local, one of the things that we run across on a regular basis, both Darryl and I are running for local office here in Keene. And we go to these budget meetings all the time. And we've been here almost 2 years, that what I get mostly from these budget increases is they will immediately blame the state. They'll be like, well, the budget is increasing because the state didn't give us, this money that they promised to give us.
And here locally in the city, the feds are withholding money that we were promised 5 years ago.
And the state would probably say the exact same thing.
The state is giving us money that they promised us 5 years ago, that they're making us pay more into people's retirements. Well, people should pay into their own retirements.
Right. But I think the more often this happens, so this keeps happening year after year after year, and they're not getting money that they were promised, the money that we sent to them, whether it be, permits or fines or whatnot that the state's taken their share, or it's an alcohol tax or the gas tax or all these things that we have here in our community, and we're immediately shipping it off to the state and to the Fed. I think the more people who wake up to the idea that we're not getting the money back will, they will begin to wake up. And this idea of just backing off and doing our own thing will become more and more popular. And so, it's not going to happen this year. If anyone tried to do it the way that some of the violent secessionists want to do it, marching on Washington with rifles, that's the absolute wrong way to do it. But just let the system keep breaking the way that it is. And, some people are also in favor of, helping it break it, getting on welfare and all that. I can't do that. It's all about, being truthful and whatnot. But let the system break and keep breaking itself, and people will wake up.
And I think you've touched on an incredibly important point, Conan, and that is that the way that we conduct ourselves in our struggle for independence has a great deal of impact on how other people are going to perceive us and what the likelihood is of a violent response. If we are confrontational and violent, if we see ourselves as a group apart, if we see the people that we're seceding from as somehow inferior or not worthy, and if that becomes part of our language in discussing the option of independence for New Hampshire, then I think it's going to be much easier to marginalize us and brand us as terrorists. We have to be inclusive. We have to be open. We have to be friendly. We have to be good neighbors, not only to our fellow people here in New Hampshire, but also to our fellow Americans throughout the United States who we're separating peaceably from, but still remaining good friends with.
Yes.
I think a concern with state secession or community secession for a lot of anarchists is that it doesn't go far enough. And I think there could also be a concern that while it's a great step to neutralize a central power, get them out of your state or your community, that there could be a complacency that comes along after that, just like happened after the American Revolution. Look what happened, right? is that maybe this next generation following secession will realize that they're a lot more free, and therefore we can kind of put it down and not worry about it anymore. And then you see either the state government or your community government become larger.
You know, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that actually ties into the next question that I was going to ask. And before we answer that, can anybody think of any other objections to secession? I've got one in my head that I want to get to before going to what happens after secession. It seems that most people, especially people that consider themselves liberals who oppose the idea of secession, they always want to go back to the uncivil war from 1861 until 1865 and say, well, secession is all about slavery. So how do you answer the objection whenever you mention secession and someone brings up that you only want to secede so that, you know, because either you're a racist or you want slaves again? How do you answer that objection?
Well, being a New Hampshireite, it's kind of hard because we have such a small colored population. I think we need to get more liberty individuals back. I think that'll help our argument a little bit, but yeah, that's a big one, because I mean that's what we learned in school, that it was in fact fought because of slavery, when in fact I think it had more to do with tariffs and whatnot, and you know. And I've heard, and I'm not a historian, but I've heard that before the Civil War actually took place, it was more of a northern idea. Secession was more of a northern thing, and they were actually...
It was. The New England states had actually threatened to secede in 1832.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know that we have such an argument just yet.
Chandler?
Yeah, it's tough, isn't it? It's hard to answer those. Have you stopped eating your wife?
It's one of those
questions.
Complete logical fallacies of, oh, well, you want this, and this happened this one time, so you must want this other thing.
Right. And while I completely agree with you that the issue of slavery is not really what that war was fought about, I think that's a losing argument with most people, because they've had the contrary drilled into their head for so long and with such fervor. I think what I try to do is I try to point to other instances of, you know, secession or independence movements throughout the world where the result has been greater liberty,
such as East Timor, South Sudan, some of the more recent secessions.
Well, the Soviet Union is a favorite example of mine. If you look at
that, wasn't really a secession. That was a collapse of the entire country,
which is what will probably happen in our situation.
Right. Well, in that case, it happened all. It kind of happened all at once. You know, the countries declared their independence at the same time, and the Soviet Union decided, you know, not to respond to that. It could as easily though happen that New Hampshire declares our independence, the federal government decides, you know, not to respond, and then
do you think that the feds would only decide not to respond if other states made that declaration at the same time, such as California, Texas, some of the more southern states, Washington and Oregon, if they decided, you know, to form Cascadia?
I think certainly that would improve our odds. I think if it was a Soviet-type situation where you had a number of republics declaring their independence at the same time, then the opportunity to respond on the federal government's part would be lost even if they wanted to. I do think it's possible to do it alone, but certainly the more fellow travelers we have, the easier it gets.
Okay, and I see the line, and I will get to you momentarily. So after New Hampshire secedes, how do you envision the new government operating? So will it be the Republic of Free Hampshire? Will it be the autonomous regions in the White Mountains and Monadnock Seacoast area jointly cooperating, or some other extremely long name that implies a voluntarist organization? Do you think that the counties will have home rule, whereas now they don't? A lot of the cities and towns don't have home rule. Mm-hmm. So do you think that counties might become the equivalent to states? Just how do you think a free or independent New Hampshire would operate?
Well, the official position of the foundation is that we support independence under the terms and authority of the present New Hampshire Constitution. And that's not to say it can't change afterwards. That's just the starting point that we want to have. I think it's very important to note that political independence doesn't equal liberty. I mean, just ask the folks in Zimbabwe. They gained independence from Britain in 1980 under terms substantially dictated by Britain, and now they're using $1 million bills as compost and watching the same brutal communist dictator be elected year after sad, weary year. So we really want to avoid that, and I think the way to do it is to have the break be as clean and as non-disruptive as possible, and that means continuing on with what we have until we decide to change it incrementally after the fact.
Conan?
Well, yeah, as you mentioned right now, we are not a home rule state. And so if we were to secede today, I do believe that there would be a lot of people who would still, hold on to the New Hampshire Constitution. But like I said, it's not going to happen today or tomorrow. So what's the frame of mind going to be in 5-10 years? I think that more and more people will be okay with the idea. And I think that it probably will be smaller communities that will in fact make the move. So yeah, Cheshire County or all, South New Hampshire or whatnot, they might decide to break off and do their own little thing and of course adopt home rule and manage their own communities.
You sort of answered another question, and I would like Chandler's opinions on this. Would you allow counties or towns or cities to secede from your secession?
Well, I think you have to. If you're going to be consistent, you have to, acknowledge the right of people to go their own way from the state of New Hampshire. If we assert our right to do the same with the federal government.
Okay, let's go over to the questions. The lovely Nimi from Free Talk Live.
Thank you very much. Chandler, it's great that you're here. Thanks for coming out. I think you may have just answered my question, actually. I have, for a long time, been fascinated with the 2004 and 2005 votes in Killington, Vermont. For those of you who are not familiar with Killington, Vermont, it's a little tiny town, smack dab in the middle of Vermont. And they wanted to secede from the state and join New Hampshire. Who doesn't want to join New Hampshire, right? So my question, I hear you speaking more on the state level, but I would like to hear your thoughts on the community level seceding from the state or the United States. Thanks.
If I could actually take that question first, I believe that, Nimi, you can personally secede from my secession that secedes from Chandler's secession that secedes from the United States. So I think that every domicile or piece of land should be allowed to be its own sort of kingdom or fiefdom or whatever term it is that you want to come up with to describe the territory over which you rule. And I see that you are wearing a crown which makes you a princess. So she would have a princessdom. So the princessdom of Nimiland is certainly able to secede from all of our secessions. At least that's how I would like to see it happen. Any input from the other two?
Yeah, absolutely. Break it down to the smallest level. I mean, all the way down to the family level, if you like. The idea, creates individuals, and individuals are, they make life taste better. It's more fun to be around, new ideas, and you can't get that unless you have, your own little independent world, your own little fiefdom, if you will, or castle that you can live in. And control.
And I do have a couple of questions that have been tweeted in, unless you have anything to add on that, Chandler?
No, I just except to say that the foundation takes no official position on what happens after we leave the United States. But speaking personally, the individual is the smallest minority. I would love to see more secession on the local and even the individual level.
So 2 questions have been tweeted in. The first question: do you bring up secession in regular conversations with everyday folks? And if so, what language do you use? And now I know that the Foundation for New Hampshire Independence has a flyer that you can actually find back at the registration desk, and the word secession is nowhere on there, so I guess that word seceded from the flyer. So you talk specifically about New Hampshire independence and sort of imply secession.
That's absolutely correct, Dale, and that was a very intentional choice. We decided from the beginning that the word secession, except when you're on the secession panel and it can't be avoided, is not going to be part of our vocabulary. And the reason for that is simply that people tend to have a more negative view of secession than they do of independence, even though the two are really one and the same. So we talk about independence, we talk about taking control back from Washington, we talk about local autonomy. These are all ideas that everybody, I think, can get on board with.
Conan, do you bring up secession in regular conversation?
I don't always use the word secession.
But when you do,
I do, use the word back off or, keep our money, things like that. But I mean, everyone who I work with knows that if they're going to sit down at the table with me and have lunch, they're probably going to be talking about it by the end of the conversation. So yes, I bring it up constantly, but I don't always, I take it. There's different levels of how I'll take it, how I'll distribute it.
And the other question that was tweeted in, if secession is in the cards for lots of states, do you see a difference between the way New Hampshire will leave?
Versus the way that those other states might leave.
Right.
You mean versus, so with guns or
if
peacefully?
Texas, New Hampshire, the Cascadia region, South Florida might join up with some Caribbean islands, because I think that would be great. Go visit South Florida and then you can just skip over to the Bahamas and you don't need an extra visa stamp in your passport. And then nobody from TSA gets to grope your balls again on that boat from Florida to the Bahamas. So do you think there will be different ways in which places secede? Whereas with other sorts of things such as cannabis legalization and medical marijuana, in a lot of places that has only passed because of initiative and referendum, which we don't have in New Hampshire, whereas in other states it actually goes through the legislature.
Sure. I mean, I could see a couple of different ways that it could happen. It could happen through a popular vote, as you say, through a referendum, perhaps in spite of the ruling government of the state at the time. That would certainly be interesting. Another thing that I can definitely see happening is the federal government just gradually becoming more and more irrelevant as the states take back local control in an increasing number of ways.
Conan, anything to add?
No, not on this one.
We have a question from Tim Mabe, not to be confused with Tom Mabe.
Yeah, whatever. Can't help that. My question is about, it's kind of a question about a sort of a loophole. New Hampshire is the only state I know of which has a right of secession clause in its state constitution. Mm-hmm. Now,
actually, before you finish the question, there are 26 states that have wording that is very similar to Article 10.
I didn't say it was the only. I said it was the one I knew of.
Article 10, the title that was added after the Constitution was ratified here in New Hampshire, a title was given to it, the right to revolution.
Okay. Well, my question is, so if you follow the wording on that, what's basically implied is that if we have the right to disband said government, whatever it is, and set up a new one. If we were to theoretically do that, to the state government, then whatever we set up afterwards would that necessarily have to be affiliated with the federal, or would it have to go through the state process again?
My understanding of how reconstitutions of states have worked in the past, because there are several states that have adopted new constitutions since they became a part of the United States, is the new constitution and whatever new governance or government that was created was a successor to the previous. So in 1901, when the state of Alabama adopted what is now not only the longest constitution in the world, but also the most amended document in human written history, the state of Alabama did not have to reapply for admission to the United States. Congress didn't have to readmit them to the United States.
Okay. I was just thinking because we could just skip the whole secession process altogether and just be.
I really like your thought there, but I don't know if it would go along, the path that you're thinking. Although whatever new government, if in 2022, if a majority of the people cast a ballot calling for a constitutional convention in New Hampshire and they decide to institute a new constitution, maybe instead of saying Constitution for the state of New Hampshire, they could slip in the wording Constitution of the Republic of New Hampshire and remove all reference to the United States and possibly secede that way. But I don't know if that is something that is actually practicable.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Well, I was just wondering if it sounded like a good idea. I don't know.
It does sound like a good idea. I just don't know if it will go about the way that you were hoping. Any thoughts?
I think this is something very similar is happening in Jefferson, Northern California.
Part of Northern California and Southern Oregon, back in the late 20s, early 30s, were trying to form a new state called the state of Jefferson. Mm-hmm. And then when the Great Depression hit, everybody was worried about trying to feed themselves, and they gave up on the idea of creating this new state.
Does the state of California Constitution have an opt-out clause?
California is one of the few states that does not recognize people as the source of power of government. Do we have any other questions? If not, we could go back to talking about, because one thing that I would really like to get into a real discussion about is after New Hampshire secedes, how will a free or independent New Hampshire operate? Because I know that me and Conan are completely opposed to coercive taxation. Chandler, I'm not sure if you're a minarchist or anarchist or voluntarist or whatever other term you want to use, but do you think that the government of let's just call it the Republic of Free Hampshire, because I really think that sounds good. So would the Republic of Free Hampshire be able to institute taxation just because the legislative body says so, or would people have the choice to opt in or opt out of paying a tax?
Right. Well, I have to be a little bit careful here because as the foundation, we have absolutely no position on what happens or doesn't happen after the secession takes place. We're just the, much like the FSP, we're just the bus. But on a personal level, my views are the same as yours on the subject of taxation. I think it's illegitimate. I would like to see us get to the point where it's not considered appropriate in a civilized society here in New Hampshire.
And we have a question from someone without a name tag.
Yeah, I keep leaving in the room. Sorry about that. My question is...
could you just give us your name real quick?
Sorry, I'm James.
Hi, James.
Nice to see you. So I am wondering, I guess, for all the people who aren't fans of the idea of secession in New Hampshire, because, when I move, I would love to secede down to the smallest person, but say the people in the Seacoast area, those are among the 49.9% who say no thanks to secession. They want to remain part of the federal government. And to that same effect, the land ostensibly owned by the federal government, roads and parks and things like that. Is there a thought on how that might look?
Well, that sort of goes along with what I was saying of everybody should be allowed to secede their personal property from my secession. And if you support the idea, but if your neighbor opposes the idea of secession, he can secede from our secession. There I go using collectivist terms. and then go to the U.S. Congress and say, hey, all of my neighbors seceded, but I still want to be part of you, and I want to give you 40% of my paycheck every week, and I want you to go kill brown people in the Middle East using my money, then that guy should be allowed to do that. One thing that is sort of the untaught history of the uncivil war, there were large chunks of the Confederacy that seceded from the Confederacy and became Union sympathizers. My family, or at least one side of my family, used to live in what is referred to lovingly as the Free State of Winston. Winston County, Alabama, seceded from the state of Alabama, and they were technically neutral. They were Switzerland during the Civil War. But both armies came through and conscripted soldiers out of the Free State of Winston. So do I think that that's something that should be allowed and respected? Absolutely. Any
I'm thinking
additions here?
Also similar peoples were the Appalachian Mountain Men during the American Revolution, who were also neutral. Some of them took sides, but most of them...
the Appalachian Mountain Men were also neutral during the Uncivil War. Mm-hmm. There was a territory called Nickajack, which ran from northeast Alabama, roughly Fort Payne, all the way up through the Appalachians through, I think, into southern Virginia.
Definitely in favor of the idea, but it might come down to having little pockets, spread out across the land might not do well. It might come down to voting with your feet at the end of the day, and you might have people who want to cling on forever and ever, majority might...
Now we're talking about something that would probably be called a polycentric civilization, to where I want to be part of the Free State of Darryl, which actually was declared independent in 1995, but not recognized by the United States government. I did mail them a copy of my personal Declaration of Independence, but they never respected that, and I later found out that in order to declare yourself a stateless person, you must leave the jurisdiction of the United States of America, turn over your passport to the consulate, and then hope that whatever country you happen to be in allows you to stay. So, in our hypothetical Republic of Free Hampshire, then anybody here would be allowed to set up their own government, and everybody would decide which group represents them. Question from Alvin.
Yes, I just thought I'd mention that in all likelihood the federal government would probably behave very poorly with respect to any state that wanted to secede, would probably put up as many roadblocks, obstructions, just about anything they could do. It would also depend probably on the personality of a president. I can imagine Obama would be very intolerant. I could also imagine John McCain being very intolerant. And then just to sidestep back to earlier discussion of the so-called Civil War, from the southern point of view, it was always referred to as the War of Northern Aggression. And Civil War really is where there's multiple groups trying to take over a country. When people are seceding, they are not trying to take over the government. They're trying to get away from it. So it's not really a civil war.
That's why I call it the uncivil war.
Right.
Because calling it Tyrant Lincoln's War is just sort of wordy.
Yeah. You mentioned that both Obama and McCain would be unfavorable, and you're absolutely right. But as we just found out, Governor Perry, who was, I think who's mentioned secession in the past, he's all on board these days. He's not in favor of secession whatsoever.
He also would not be in favor of you seceding from his secession. He wants to secede so that he can be petty tyrant king of Texas. He doesn't want Conan living in Galveston to say, hey, Galveston wants to be free. Like, he wants to have his little fiefdom down there.
Yeah, I think if you're going to argue that secession or independence is legitimate, you have to respect the rights of others to do the same thing. I would be very sad, speaking to your question, if Portsmouth decided to stay with the United States and I needed my passport to go to dinner at Massimo's. But ultimately, that's just one of the things that we need to respect.
And I just pulled up, since you did mention the tyrant Obama, do you guys remember last year the petitions up on the petitions.whitehouse.gov website where a bunch of states had the petition and they gathered large amounts of signatures? The White House responded to that, but the response didn't get a lot of news play or media attention. So if I could, I just want to read part of this. The response itself was written by some guy named John Carson, who is the director of the Office of Public Engagement, which basically means that he's one of Obama's little gophers. Like, here, go handle this. So it says in part, our founding fathers established the Constitution of the United States in order to form a more perfect union through the hard and frustrating but necessary work of self-government. They enshrined in that document the right to change our national government through the power of the ballot, a right that generations of Americans have fought to secure for all, but they did not provide a right to walk away. Now, this is actually contradictory to fact, because there were at least 3 states that in their ratification documents sent to the government of the United States when they ratified the U.S. Constitution, they said, if we ratify this document, we reserve the right to leave the Union. One of those states was Virginia, which attempted to leave in 1861. And the U.S. government actually claims that Virginia did secede. That's how West Virginia became a state, because West Virginia seceded from the secession of Virginia and then, petitioned to become a state. But then on the other hand, the U.S. government claims that the right to secede does not exist, and that was in the Supreme Court case of White v. Texas. But Virginia reserved the right in their ratification document to secede. New York reserved the right in their ratification document to secede. And as I'm sure you all agree, that no one person or group has more rights than any other person or group, and knowing that all states are supposedly equal under the U.S. government, if one or more state reserves the right to do something, then all states have the right to do that same thing. So the little jackass here by the name of John Carson is completely wrong in his response that is the official word of the tyrant Obama. Anything to add on this?
Yeah, I remember when these petitions were coming out, and we talked about whether it was something we as a foundation wanted to be involved with. And we decided that we didn't for a couple of reasons. The most important one is that we don't think that we need to ask permission from the federal government to assert our right to independence. And when we petition them for that, we're kind of putting them in a position where we're saying, please, federal government, will you allow us to do this? And as Mr. Carson's response shows, they're not acting in good faith there. I mean, Mr. Carson is lying. I don't even know how to put a polite face on what he's doing there. He should know better, he does know better, and he's lying. So there's no reason that we should, go before those people and ask their permission, and if they don't give it, kind of give up and say, oh, well, that's the way it goes. We just need to get on with the business of asserting our right.
I've heard some people use the comparison of secession to divorce. So would not a document coming from a state government to the Fed saying we want out, would that not be akin to someone's spouse handing them divorce papers? Because you're essentially asking for permission to leave the relationship. So do you see that as a valid comparison? Why or why not? Either one of you can take this. Preferably both of you have an opinion.
It makes perfect sense to me. And by the way, I didn't sign any of those petitions as either. But yeah, why ask permission at the end of the day? And yes, it is just like divorce. And if you're asking for a divorce from the United States, I mean, who are we asking at the end of the day? Is it the people who are really in charge?
So we should go to the next Bilderberg meeting and give them our declarations of secession?
Has Alex Jones had anything to say on this?
I don't really care what that fat loudmouth guy has to say. Apologies if anybody loves Alex Jones, but I think that he's just annoying, and he is in no way a libertarian.
Yeah, I think the comparison is valid as far as a state, choosing to leave an abusive relationship with the federal government. The one thing I would be cautious about is that we're not trying to divorce ourselves from the people of the United States. We still want the bonds of friendship and trade and all of the good things that come with human relations, between us and the population of the rest of the United
Except for the
States.
people down in Mass, right? Because we still want to build that wall.
Yeah, we'll definitely. Yeah, we need some border control there, but other than that,
We've got enough granite here. We could build a big old wall.
So I guess this sort of ties back into one of the other questions of how then do we go about actually seceding?
Well, we can keep doing what we're doing. We can attempt to ask permission and see how well that works. We can keep signing petitions, and we can...
Well, the New Hampshire government has never asked permission to leave the U.S. government. So I don't think it's an apt comparison to say keep doing what we've already done.
Right. Good point. You can keep doing what we, the activists, have been, proclaiming. Some of us, anyways, and bringing it up as often as possible in conversation, and letting the people know that this has happened in the past. This is a viable option. If you do want to strengthen our communities, the best way to do that is to keep the money here. Instead of sending it off to fight silly wars and fun things that never come back to us. I think the biggest thing is the conversation starter, is to get the conversation out there and,
So at what point do we as secessionists declare ourselves the government of the state of New Hampshire and then write up a document that we all sign saying that we are seceding?
I think it has to happen naturally, and I don't think it can come from us. I don't think it can come from the people who start the idea. When you have when you look at the American Revolution, there, if I'm correct, Darryl, about 33% of the people at the time favored the independence movement. About 33% wanted to stay with Britain, and the rest just were indifferent or were mixed in their feelings. I think when we get to that point, things are going to start to happen naturally without our direct involvement, and I think that's what we need to be trying to accomplish. I'm going to go back to the idea of community building here, being good neighbors. We need to get the ideas out there. We need to engage with people. We need to show them not only that these ideas are right, but that we're the sort of people that are going to have right ideas. We know what we're talking about, and we're the sort of people you want as your neighbors. And when that starts growing, when we start creating that community, when it starts growing to that 33%, it's just going to naturally happen that we'll move in that direction. I don't think we have to centrally plan it, and indeed we should not.
Okay, so for anybody that's curious, Abel Freeman has just joined us. He sent me a message as the panel began that he was running late. And apparently, I can tell from his breathing, he obviously ran here on his feet from Manchester or wherever it is that he lives.
Grafton.
Grafton. That's even further. So I'll let you catch your breath before having you introduce yourself. Let's go to Mr. Will Kostrick.
I just wanted to say on your divorce analogy that you can take that a little deeper, looking at people who would like to stay a part of the United States and perhaps an abused spouse. But aside from that, if Portsmouth, say, did want to remain a part of the United States, how would that work? We have working examples of that. That's what an embassy is. That's what ships do on the high seas. That's the point of a flag, to let everyone know that this is the set of laws that we're operating under. And I think there's a science fiction, I can't place it right off the top of my head, book that where in the future individuals, as you go about your life through the world, display your own flag, which lets everyone know the set of rules that you're operating under, so they're aware of that when they enter into dealings with you.
That actually sounds very similar, the analogy or reference to the science fiction future book sounds very similar to the stateless period of Celtic and Gaelic history, whereby there were polycentric organizations or societies, and people came up with their own banners, and banners ultimately became flags. And something else, there are a lot of real-life examples of enclaves, of parts of one country that are completely surrounded by another. I believe there are somewhere near 1 or 2 dozen enclaves of Switzerland and Italy that are in the other country, because those, Alp areas, there's communities that are completely surrounded by either Switzerland or Italy that are actually part of the other country. So it can work, it does work, and if Portsmouth wants to remain part of the U.S. for whatever weird reason, then I believe that they should be allowed to do that, and I don't think anybody up here is disagreeing that they should be. And there are real-life examples of how such an enclave would work. Mr. Eric Freerock.
So until we can separate ourselves from the federal government, what can we do to slowly withdraw what we can from the federal government?
One of the things that I would really like to see the foundation get into doing in future years is seeking out people who are being harmed by the federal government in New Hampshire and helping them to repair that harm. Stepping in and doing what the federal government won't do. Just with the government shutdown here earlier this year, the federal government closed down the bathrooms along the Kankamangus Highway. It's going to be something I regret till the day I die, that the foundation didn't have the money to put up Foundation for New Hampshire Independence branded porta potties in front of every closed federal bathroom.
Conan?
A great idea. I like that. More education, more showing the people this is where they can't take care of us any longer if they ever did. And look at this organization over here. It's doing just that, supplying functioning. A functioning.
If the foundation wants to take over something and provide a service that the state is not providing, on Route 9 between here and Concord, there is what used to be a rest area that actually has big concrete barriers blocking off so you can't go in. I would love to see somebody move those barriers and then homestead it and begin providing a service that the state isn't. Abel, do you have any response to this before you introduce yourself to our audience?
Absolutely. I believe, all of us as individuals need to take measures to extricate ourselves from the federal activities that are so greatly and mostly destructive, and I think people ought to organize their lives in a manner that can stay under the radar in the realm of the IRS, because I don't care what anybody says. The fact is that Larkin Rose and Edna Lane Brown were both right, that there is no actual requirement for New Hampshireites to actually pay federal income tax. It's extortion, and as is many things from the federal government, there are other things that we can do that will allow us to extricate ourselves, and I think we need to actually do it as individuals, and maybe even look further at complete and individual secession.
Yeah, and that's something that has been touched on. At least I'm fairly certain I can speak for Conan on this, that we believe that you have a right to secede from our secession from somebody else's secession that seceded from somebody else.
By the way, going back to the organization's proving that the government is useless. I just read an article just this morning, which I want to further investigate. But in Detroit, we all know that at least a third of the city is essentially empty buildings.
Right.
And right
They've
now,
got the threat management centers that are doing the jobs that the police in Detroit refuse to do.
And not to mention, they're actually tearing buildings down and turning it into farmland. There's one individual who bought a large portion, and he is essentially handing it out to the people. People are coming on and they're farming the land. One of the banks, I can't remember which one, but they actually agreed to buy some land if they promise to tear the buildings down, and they are immediately handing it out to let people farm it. So, Detroit's a good city to keep our eyes on, in the future, which might prove what's coming down the road for the rest of us.
And if you want just one thing that you can do to help the cause of secession, look for ways to help your neighbors. That's ultimately how we're going to get the government out of our lives, is by being good neighbors.
Okay, and Abel, let's finally have you introduce yourself to our audience.
Hello, everyone. I'm Abel Freeman. I'm presently staying in Grafton, New Hampshire, which is part of my my secession, because I think amongst the different towns and cities in New Hampshire, Grafton is in fact it's almost as far as you can secede and still be part of New Hampshire. And
you could always go up to, what is it, Pittsfield, Pittsburgh, right there, right up on the border with Canada.
The Indian Stream
Republic.
Republic.
There are actually a number of places that are unincorporated as of yet, which is really unusual. I mean, I grew up in Michigan, where where there were townships everywhere, and those were basically unincorporated space, and I had thought that when I came to New England, there couldn't possibly be any leftover spaces, but turns out there are, and they're a little less organized, of course, than Grafton is, but I see really, really wonderful possibilities with Grafton and our extricating ourselves from the state in general, which is what my position is on secession, is that we secede individually and have any kind of loose voluntary associations going forward.
Now, you're a member of a group on Facebook called the Shire Micronation. Is that anything other than a Facebook group? And if so, what are they doing to promote the ideas of secession?
At this point, as far as I know, that's all it is a Facebook group. It's the idea of the the social media here is really a great organizing force, and it could, sprout out from just that silly, seemingly silly, and I really don't consider it silly, Facebook group, and I actually think that we're needing to go a whole lot closer to that than a lot of people seem to be willing to be interested in.
Let's go to the questions.
You were asking for ways that you could help the secessionist movement, etc. I believe, as a lot of people do, that the federal government will simply collapse of its own weight. And in a scenario like that, it comes to mind my favorite Twilight Zone episode with the bomb shelter. I don't know if you remember that episode. All the neighbors were in denial about the potential of a nuclear bomb or something like that, except for one person who built a bomb shelter. And the moment that danger was potentially there, they all ran trying to get into the bomb shelter. And I think we should sort of look at it as that, where what the organization should do is perhaps prepare things in advance. For example, prepare a to-do list for the New Hampshire legislature. Prepare the secessionist documents to be able to ship to Washington right away. So, these documents already prepared. Prepare letters to the payroll companies to say stop deducting federal withholdings from people's paychecks, etc. Have all those things in place. Have this repository of information for what people should do and look forward to doing. So when those events happen, you will be the source. And if you're the source, then that's where the information will come from.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's exactly what we are, is an organization that plans on being around after it actually takes place. We are going to dissolve once we actually secede.
Right, but he's saying working up to secession, once the U.S. government does ultimately collapse, which is something that I'm actually surprised hasn't happened yet. I remember when I was in high school and the federal debt hit, listen to this number, $4 trillion. I thought, this can't keep going on. And then it hit 5, and then 6, and 7, and 10, and now it's very near 17 trillion. Oh, it's over that now. And there is no more debt ceiling. They completely did away with the debt ceiling. So you gave basically your hyperactive 8-year-old kid a limitless credit card and said, go run into the candy store and toy store and do whatever you want to. So the people in Congress are completely insane by giving the U.S. government that is $17 trillion in debt unlimited spending. Like, American Express is not that stupid. So at what point, at $20 trillion debt, is that when we send these documents to Washington? Like, at what point do we consider the U.S. government completely collapsed?
It will be a dollar collapse. In my opinion, that's going to precede everything. Once the rest of the world cuts up the credit card and we're on our own, that will be the trigger.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Walter. We're racing against the clock here. Ultimately, the U.S. government is past saving. We're the Roman Empire in decline at this point. We haven't actually elected a horse to the Senate yet, but really that might be an improvement. So I
would vote for the horse.
Yeah.
I've repeatedly voted for none of the above, which I'm actually very glad that one of the absolute worst representatives in all of the New Hampshire legislature, a guy by the name of Chuck Weed, who actually, he supports marijuana, and that's about the only good thing going for him. That, and his last name is Weed. He actually introduced legislation to put none of the above on ballots in New Hampshire. So if there are any state reps sitting in the audience, hint, hint, Representative Sylvia, that might be something that we could all lobby to get. And hopefully it becomes a binding option, unlike in Nevada, to where it's just a sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Symbolic. Yes, thank you. It's a symbolic option in Nevada, although the Republicans, Libertarians, and Greens have all filed a lawsuit to make that a binding option or remove it from the ballot.
Well, if I may, Walter, just briefly to speak to your point, I think that one of the most important things that we can be doing is preparing for that collapse. A power vacuum is dangerous. That's when bad people take over. We need to.
That's when you wind up like Somalia.
Yes. Yeah, we need to avoid that. And the way that we avoid it is by having good neighbors, having civil institutions in place and ready to step in and take over when this happens.
I think that agorism, and I don't know if that word has been brought up in this context.
Actually, this is the first time that somebody has mentioned agorism or agorism, however you wish to pronounce it, during this panel today. Actually, I don't think I heard it at all yesterday either.
Well,
it's hard growing your own food, and
very good.
That's can be difficult. But by the way, that's the organization that I would want to be a part of. Is
the Society of Agorists?
People who grow food.
Well, Sam Konkin III in his writings, and all the books are free out there. You can read them yourself. Brought up this idea of agorism as the, kind of the new libertarianism, and because of the Libertarian Party, polluting everything, the Orwellian nature of anything that tends to challenge the challenge the state in its death grip on humanity is the answer. That we figure out how to operate outside of the realms of these destructive organizations. And like I say, it's not just going to be the federal government or the state government or even the town governments. They're all somewhat destructive in their efforts, and they're all, using coercion, to do their operation. And we need to stop.
Miss Nimi, I believe you have another question, and you're not wearing your princess
My
crown
princess crown.
anymore.
It doesn't mean I'm not a princess.
Okay.
You guys, could you talk into the end of your mics? Because when you're talking to the side, it's difficult to hear you in the back of the room. But my question is for Abel, specifically. I'm glad you're here, because I have a question about you being from Grafton. Grafton is home to the Peaceful Assembly Church. And I'm interested to know if you see religious organizations having a role in secession. Can you comment on that?
I am not a religious person and don't engage in, belief systems that I can't logically kind of generate. I do not at all oppose, though, others.
If I may clarify, there are some religious organizations popping up in New Hampshire that are open to all faiths or none. So I'm speaking not specifically to the religious structure, but more of the church role and how it's recognized by the federal and state government.
Well, it can easily, and is actually becoming in the Peaceful Assembly Church, which I'm going to be a member of in any case, that in fact, we plan to replace the organizations that having that seed point of our friend John Cannell, and I'm happy to say I will be part of that. And tomorrow we have a potluck dinner up in Grafton starting at 3 o'clock. So if anybody's interested in heading back
They'll
up
all
there.
be here as part of the Keenevention because our Sunday keynote speaker begins at 3:30.
Oh, darn.
So you don't want our fine audience to miss out on hearing former Cheshire County Corrections Officer Brian Tan give the closing speech tomorrow. And if I could just add to something that Nimi brought up.
Well, there you go. There's an idea.
That actually couldn't happen in this room as part of the contract. Could certainly happen outside afterwards. But just to add to Nimi's question about religious societies or churches being part of sort of a polycentric civilization or society advocating secession, that's actually one of the roles that churches played a couple thousand years ago. In the Roman Empire, the Jewish people had special privileges from the Roman government, and anyone who was a Jew or of Jewish descent did not have to worship the state gods. And then there was, the whole thing with the Messiah and whether or not Christians were actually Jews or whatnot. But there were still polycentric societies based around religion. In ancient Mecca, there were Jews, Christians, Muslims, and pagans living in the city together. They were next door neighbors, and they lived down the street from one another. And depending on whichever group or sect they belonged to, determined what set of rules they followed. And if people from competing or complementary societies had conflicts, then there were precedents and procedures set out of this is what happens if a Muslim and a Christian have a conflict in Mecca. This is what happens if a Jew and a Christian have a conflict. This is what happens if a pagan and somebody else have a conflict. So knowing that historically that religious groups and churches did play a part in polycentric civilizations, and even to some degree in certain secessions, I don't see any reason why they would not play a part in any future secession that takes place. Question from Tim.
Okay, so in the view of secession, would buying the land that the federal government owns in New Hampshire,
The land that the federal government claims to own.
owns, whatever, would it be a good step for private individuals or even just the state of New Hampshire to acquire that land through buying it or through other means, maybe trading it? Would that be good for...
I think that would be a much better plan. Someone offering to purchase land from the U.S. federal government would work out a whole lot better than people just going in and saying, we're taking over the White Mountain National Park. Because that is when the feds start rolling in with tanks, in my opinion. They might roll in with tanks the day that the letter arrives at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, Washington, D.C. I forget the zip code.
Well, I didn't mean through just setting up tent there and saying I own it. I meant they either buy it from the federal government or whatever you want to call it,
I think purchasing would work out better than homesteading.
Yeah, what I meant is would you think that would be a good direction to go in?
I don't know if the federal government, or more specifically the National Park Service, is interested in hearing any offers on purchase of the White Mountain National Park, and I'm not sure what other land in New Hampshire that they might own
yet.
But I do think that would work out much better, someone trying to purchase the land before just deciding to homestead it.
Yeah, it's peaceful and it's non-confrontational. I think both of those things are very, very important in as far as how we conduct ourselves and how others see us as we go about our quest for independence.
I think that there will be some of the large creditors to the United States be interested in what happens when the U.S. government dissolves, and those guys have armies. And, so I don't know if we would be able to convince anyone to back the Chinese down when they have a big, credit card,
Do you think China would buy the White Mountains, and what do you think they would do with it?
Ideally, I think, given the fact that they are embracing the idea of commerce, that maybe they wouldn't change things that much and try to generate commerce, but at the same time, the Communist Party would be a party to that, and there would be issues, and I don't know what to say about all that. I mean, what has been created is created by these people called the U.S. government, and been supported by many, many, many people throughout history to vote for these idiots, and we're up against it here, and I don't know, if there's a way of actually not having some major trouble coming down our pike at.
All right, and we've got time for one final question, and it's actually something that was tweeted in using @Darryl W. Perry #secession. The question is, some people in Grafton hate the UN. What is your position on the UN now and after New Hampshire secedes? Let's let Abel go first, because I know that Abel can be long-winded, and then I can cut him off and go to Conan.
The UN is just some puppet, world government, pretending to be something that they're not, and I think only causing problems, no matter whether you're a member nation or So again, unless the UN is ready to allow every individual to be a member in my ideal secession reality of we all get to secede. I can't see it being any kind of a benefit.
So you would not want to seek UN recognition for an independent New Hampshire?
No.
Conan, before I get your answer, I just want to preface it with there are only 2 nations that I can think of off the top of my head, other than the Vatican, that have limited international recognition that are not also members of the UN, that being Taiwan, which until the mid-70s actually was a member of the UN. And they were kicked out in favor of the People's Republic of China because that nation has a one China rule and says we are the only China. Nobody can recognize any other country with the word China in its name. And the official name of Taiwan is Republic of China. The other being Palestine, which has fairly wide recognition of independence, but is not a member of the UN. So Conan, real quick, your thoughts on the UN now and after New Hampshire secedes?
Well, they don't concern me all that much today, and they most definitely wouldn't concern me tomorrow when I get what I want, which is, more individual independence.
So do you think that New Hampshire would be recognized internationally as an independent nation without UN membership? Because that's one of the struggles for Kosovo.
I have heard the argument that a first good step would be to achieve that independence. But I don't think getting closer to whatever we're moving into, I don't think that it will begin to lose its importance, and we'll have a lot more on our minds than what is going on, halfway across the world and how they're doing their business. I think it'll start to come closer and closer to home. And what I mentioned earlier, food is a big thing on my list, and I want to make sure that either I'm growing it myself or my neighbor is, or we have real good friends down south who are making it in plentiful portions.
Chandler?
Well, I think I take a really pragmatic approach to this. On one hand, I hold no brief for the UN. I think it's a tool of tyrants. I don't think it should really have a place in post-secession New Hampshire. However, if it's the only way to attain international recognition for New Hampshire, perhaps it would be practical to seek that recognition in the UN in the short term. However, let's not get trapped into that mold. If they say, no, we don't recognize you, that can't be the end of our struggle. We have to find other ways.
Have you heard of UNPO, the Unrepresented Nations and Peoples Organization?
I'm not familiar. It sounds like something I should check out.
They were actually very helpful in the independence of East Timor and 1 or 2 other island nations recently. One last thing to add, Abel.
I would like to honor Lloyd Danforth in the abolition of the UN. He's a pork that was in New Hampshire, Grafton with us, and has recently passed away, and we celebrate his birthday every year by burning the UN flag, and I'm with Lloyd on that one.
Thank you, Abel.
Oh. Real quick, New Hampshire Liberty Party can be found at nhliberty.info.
We actually have sign-up forms at Darryl's raffle table back there. Speaking of the raffle, tickets are available. Darryl, you want to talk real quick about your prizes, and then we'll wish you all off to a good lunch?
Absolutely. So,
you're good.
Oh, okay. There are several prizes. 3 are being given away today. There is a Cop Block goodie bag that has a Cop Block hoodie, a Cop Block beanie toboggan thing that goes on one's head, along with badge number 317, put out by ShinyBadges.com to remind you that Shiny Badges don't grant extra rights. There's also some knitted or crocheted, I don't know the difference, beanie toboggan things that go on one's head, and what appears to be mittens. that were crocheted by the lovely Kristen Alpert. There are, 3 beanies and a pair of gloves? Yeah, so whatever's back there, I think it's 3 beanies and a pair of mittens are being given away, as is a date with Derek J. Derek will buy you dinner and serenade you at karaoke.
That's tonight, right?
That's tonight. And as always, what happens other than that is between consenting adults. Raffle tickets are $1 a piece, 6 for $5, 12 for $10, or your height in tickets for $25. There are also prizes being given away tomorrow, including a $250 gift certificate from Specialty Cleaning Services. That gift certificate can be applied to moving services. Hint, hint, if you win and don't live in New Hampshire, you can use that for a rental truck to get here as fast as possible. There's also a gift certificate for a free night at the Stone Farm on Liberty Acres Bed and Breakfast in Fitzwilliam, and that prize will be accompanied with some cash monies. So the more tickets that are sold means more monies go to the winner.
And the ticket revenue will be going to help offset the cost of Keenevention. So thanks in advance for all that. Thank you. Great panel. Really informative. And I had a comment from one in the audience saying these are the most in-depth panels they've ever seen. So everybody's really been enjoying it. Thanks, gentlemen, for
and don't forget, after lunch, the media panel. And I know that I had tweeted out earlier that I was going to be live streaming the audio. I had issues. One of the few problems with Linux is that certain softwares don't work properly, so I couldn't live stream the audio. I'm going to work over lunch to try to get that fixed to live stream the media panel.
So things are getting pretty busy here. Head out, enjoy your lunch. If you are VIP, don't forget we do have the VIP lunch. If you aren't signed up for it, it's probably almost too late. If you want to get in the VIP lunch, come see me if you aren't signed up. Otherwise, there are maps there. Wendy has them at the registration table. Come back here by 1:30. You're not going to want to miss the news media panel hosted by none other than Dave Ridley from the Ridley Report. He is in the house, and he will be bringing us the media panel at 1:30. So we'll see you back here for that. Enjoy your lunch, and enjoy the company and the great folks here at Keenevention.
We'd like to invite you to visit freekeene.com. FreeKeene.com features audio, video, and blogs chronicling the transition to a voluntary society. FreeKeene.com also has comments and discussion forums so you can be heard. FreeKeene.com.
I should be in Keene, New Hampshire with the Free Staters.